We are so fundamentally and deeply interdependent, interconnected. Everything in our life comes through other, with other, happiness, suffering. Imagine we are suspended alone in space. What would that mean? No friendship, no love, no nothing. Life is become totally empty.
And now to the evening and the conversation that we are all waiting for. At a time when we are seeing hypersonic missiles and muscular men across the world really bringing us to the brink of war, when the Pentagon is renamed as the Department of War, we are going to present an entire evening devoted to strengths of another dimension altogether. We are going to be talking about altruism and happiness, and the power of the mind to completely shift the nature of reality, the absolute interdependence that underpins our existence, and whether it is possible at all for us to live in kind of isolated cocoons of well-being if we're not thinking of the rest of the world. To bring light into that is one of the most renowned both spiritualists as well as scientists in the world, a beloved Buddhist monk, Matthieu Ricard, a huge applause to him, who has been called the happiest man on the planet, and that's something we'll decode. But more crucially, he has been at the center of scientific experiments into the Buddhist tradition, the Buddhist meditation practices, and he'll bring to us the absolutely jaw-drop, astonishing revelations that empiricism has brought to the study of the human mind. So a very, very warm welcome, Matthieu, and thank you very much for being here. Thank you so much, Matthieu. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to you again. As I said, you were there at Synapse and you blew everybody's mind there. So we are really going to enjoy speaking to you about the nature of the human mind. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
So Matthieu, I wanted to start with this idea that you can train yourself for compassion. You normally think that you're born as a compassionate person or that you're born as an insightful person. But you have spent more than 55 years meditating and now doing scientific experiments that show that you can actually train yourself to do that. So will you talk to us about that concept and what these scientific experiments discovered?
So, nobody here was born knowing how to read and write, play the sitar or chess or whatever. And
can everybody hear Matthieu at the back?
Yes.
Okay.
And we all went to school, happily or not. Then we trained in the various skills. So by which mystery, some most fundamental, because if you play the sitar, it's fantastic, but it's not the end of the life if somehow you don't. I don't play the sitar, I would have loved to do so. But fundamental human qualities like altruism, compassion, resilience, inner freedom, inner peace, inner strength. Why? By which mystery, either we should have them full-blown when we're born, or we could never change them, they will be engraved in stone. That will be a complete exception to every single other human quality or skill. So 2,500 years of contemplative studies in India, everywhere, the cradle of Indian civilization, and then Buddhism came within it, have dedicated their whole lives to transform their mind, to go from delusion and confusion and ignorance to wisdom, to be addicted to the cause of suffering, to be freedom from suffering. And then more recently, the last 30 years, neuroscientists found that contrary to what was believed before, that the brain is so complex that when you reach a certain age, you could not mess up with the brain because it will be terrible, so you can't change anymore. But it was completely false until the last day. Neuroplasticity allows change. How? When you are exposed to some training or to new situation. It could be a positive training, that training attention and compassion. It could be also a very negative training. Training child soldier to kill without any hesitation. That's also plays with brain plasticity. So that means that whatever we train in is going to change our brain and somehow to change ourselves. So that's something that the science of mind of Buddhism has developed over 2,500 years. So now the two can meet for hopefully to be able to serve society.
So in this, Matthieu, I'd like to share with the audience that, Matthieu has been through many, as I was saying, scientific experiments, and why he's called the happiest man on the planet is because Richard Davidson, put more than 300 electrodes on his brain and saw that through this meditation practice, the gamma waves on his brain was absolutely outside the spectrum of the normal, and that's how he's refashioned his brain. But, at the heart of this is the idea of meditation, and in the modern world, mindfulness has become a kind of catchword. Funnily and interestingly, you said that the way mindfulness is now defined is so narrow that even a psychopath could be mindful, So
Yes, well.
what do you think then, what would be your definition of mindfulness? And when you meditate, it was a surprise to me to know that you can't just meditate. You have to meditate with a certain purpose, and then different parts of your brain respond to that. So do share both these ideas.
So I can understand in the West why they are not sure what meditation is. Because meditation, in romantic literature is sort of musing about things and things like that. In India, give me a break. Bhavana means to cultivate, to train into something. So, and in Tibetan, the word gom means to become familiar with something. So now, if you tell someone, oh, I am training, so you wait, what? Golf, chess, mathematics. So it's same. Meditation by itself doesn't mean anything. It means you are training your mind. So, but of course, both in Hindu and all the great tradition, and especially in Buddhism, which has made a specialty of training the mind, we train the mind in fundamental human qualities that makes us an optimally good human being, and then that allows us to be at the service of others. So what are those qualities? Well, I just named a few of them. Altruistic love, compassion, strength of mind, freedom from the mental poisons of hatred, craving, lack of discernment and pride and jealousy that poison our life, poison others' life. So that's what we become free of. Freedom doesn't mean, I heard once on the BBC a young girl saying, freedom is just to do everything that comes through my mind without anyone having to say something about it. That's to be the complete slave of your wandering thoughts. Freedom is to have freedom from precisely those mental chain reaction, so that you regain, you keep that inner freedom from hope and fear, from attraction, repulsion, and from all the consequences of that leads where? Suffering. So freedom leads to freedom from suffering, so we can call that happiness. When I did a book on happiness, actually I should have called it suffering, but it would probably not have sold many copies. But the only real ultimate happiness is enlightenment. Until then, it's just like a step by step.
So I'm going to come and explore the ideas of self and consciousness and death and all of the altruism with you. I just want to stay on this topic a little longer. As I said, it was a surprise to me reading about your book and through your work that with Tanya Singer, again another neuroscientist, you did work with a kind of sample group over 9 months, and when they meditated on empathy, a different part of the brain responded. When you meditated on compassion, a different part of the brain. So, what does that mean? Is there no common playbook to meditation? Do we really now have to focus on a particular purpose? Like, suppose I want to be successful, do I meditate differently to if I want to be compassionate? And how do different parts of the brain respond?
With regard to empathy, yes. So, you know, I experimented many labs. I know all the fMRI in Princeton, they're all little bit different. So I spent 110 hours in fMRI machine. And one day, Stephen Koslin, who was the chair of the psychology at Harvard, asked me, but what did you learn working for us? And I told him, you know, when I go back to my hermitage, you know, I'm very happy to collaborate, but my practice goes on the same. So he was very disappointed. So you must have been learning something. So I did, in the end, learn something important when I worked with Tanya Singer. You know, the concept of empathy is not a very clear word, especially in Buddhism. We don't have, there's an equivalent to, basically it means there's two kinds. Emotional empathy is to resonate with others. You know, it could be joy. And when I come in, everybody is joyful, so I'm sort of joyful before knowing exactly what's going on. But another side is if you, day after day after day, take care of sick person, you know, homeless, people who suffer, and you only keep on resonating with their suffering, empathy is the effect that others' state of mind or feeling has on you. It sort of goes like that. So if you resonate with suffering again and again, no patient may die or cure, but they don't suffer for 25 years, very rare. But a nurse or a caregiver, if keep on resonating, at the end it's too much. You know, the burden is too much, so it comes to empathic distress, emotional exhaustion, what we call burnout. And it affects up to 60% of medical personnel in their life. So Tanya Singer was a great specialist of empathy, and I was coming with my meditation on compassion. So she put me in fMRI. It was a real-time fMRI. And after a few moments, she said, what are you doing? No, this is not the area that I find all the time when people, and I said, well, I know I'm doing compassion. And so she said, come out, we have to discuss. So we discussed a little bit. And she said, can you just do empathy with suffering? So I remember very tragic circumstance which I had witnessed. The night before, I see the documentary of Romanian orphans being in terrible condition. You know, they were so frail that you could hardly touch them. So I did that for half an hour in the fMRI, and within half an hour, I had a small burnout. So normally, you don't stay too long in the fMRI. I happened to stay for 6 hours one time. So after 45 minutes, she said, we'd like a break, or you shift to compassion right now. I said, let me shift to compassion because I don't feel good. So when I shifted to compassion, it's like completely reversing. You know, it's like a dam of love flowing to those people who have suffering. I could imagine those, you know, orphans and taking them in my arm, and every atom of suffering filled with atom of love. And then the brain was completely shifted to different areas of the brain. So then Tanya was sort of quite surprised. So then she studied further and further, and then she found that they are quite different areas. Not only that, but that compassion, which is not oriented toward you, but completely oriented toward others. Suppose you are a surgeon on the battlefield. You know, if you faint, the first person you see, you need to do something because he has an amputated arm, and you start crying and faint, that is not going to be very helpful. The more suffering, the more courage, and the more determination the surgeon will have. So that's compassion. So in effect, we found that compassion regenerates your strength. It's like a balm. It's like an antidote. While empathy is very necessary to know, is others suffering or not, or is it joyful or sad? But you should not stay on that. It's like an alarm bell, but the alarm rings 24 hours, it's no good. So then we found that the antidote to burnout was actually compassion. So there's no compassion fatigue, there's empathy fatigue.
That's, as I said, it was a really amazing discovery for me, you know. And again, you know, it's all these experiments have shown that the brain, both structurally and functionally, completely changes. And so Matthieu has been speaking of this idea of the mind as a muscle and human qualities literally as skills, you know, and that's a theme that's going to run through our evening, actually. But Matthieu, I'm going to come to altruism, and we'll come back to compassion and empathy, because it also centers on the idea of the self. But again, in the context of the geopolitics, the extreme climate, huge extreme weather events around the world, you have also been advocating altruism as the most important and powerful philosophy for the 21st century. And I wanted you to communicate that and talk about that with the audience, but also that why is it distinctive, what you're saying? Because from the time you're born, everyone's always telling you to be good to others. It's the almost cliched message of every religion. So then why is what you're saying so different, you know? And just telling people that they should be good is not going to make them good. So what is the argument you have for the 21st century, which will really penetrate the resistance to altruism?
You know, all my teacher, the Khyentse Rinpoche, Khyentse Rinpoche, and especially the Dalai Lama, has been emphasizing again and again and again the importance of compassion. So I know I wrote a book on happiness, but I thought in the end, what really, really matters is having good heart, as the Dalai Lama says.
Will you talk into the mic?
Yes. No, that's fine, but you know, it may be good for you, but is that going to solve any issue? So then I start thinking about that. You know, I met economists, specialists of the evolution, psychologists, I had the opportunity to meet wonderful people in many walks of life. And I felt that, you know, if we want to, deal with the challenges of the 21st century, there's a very big challenge of reconciling 3 time scale. You know, the present moment, a mother somewhere in a rural India or Africa, her only concern is to feed her kids the next week. So don't talk to her about, I don't know, politics or environment or something like that. No, sorry. So then there is a longer term, mid-term, a career, a generation, a family, a lifetime. So there, what people, sorry, what do people, it's fine. So what do people aspire in life? I mean, they want to have a fulfilled life. Nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, may I suffer the whole day and if possible my whole life. We want somehow to have a good life. And that's a legitimate aspiration. And then there's a new challenge. Because 12,000 years ago, we were between 1 to 5 million people on Earth. No big deal. Why? Because before that, the climate was hectic. Then we entered the Holocene, which is exceptionally stable time of climate, until the Industrial Revolution, and especially the 1950s, the great acceleration. We entered the Anthropocene, where human beings become the major force to change the planet. So that came somehow surreptitiously. Nobody waked up in the morning, I'm going to destroy the world. We don't feel there's a delusion of responsibility. And it's very difficult for human beings to be motivated for something that's happening, say, in 20, 30 years. Now, if you say this place is going to catch in fire now, we all run. In 30 years, and so what? We will see. So that's the problem. Winston Churchill said, a statesman thinks of next generation, a politician next election. So they don't want to take risks by imposing drastic measures that we need to take to remedy climate change. So therefore, how you put around the table, suppose they accept some few crazy guys, and there are few nut guys today in this world who don't care about a better world and who just think about killing as many people that they can. But suppose we all aspire to a better world and sit around the table with the climate scientists like Johan Rockström that you are going to invite, politicians, social workers, the mother who wants to feed their kids, and all these people, and what is the single concept that may make them work together for a better world? It's not going to be selfishness. That's the end of it. It's going to be having more consideration for others. But you will have an economy that is at the service of society and not the opposite.
True, but Matthieu, that's the challenge I posed to you in the question, which was that this is a good to have, but it doesn't become a must have. you know, for all the respect that you command across the world, even you sitting there, or the Pope, or a Hindu master, or a Muslim, you know, Islamic, even with millions of people who might look up to you, just you saying that be good to others, think long term, have compassion, it's a good to have, but it's not a must have. You know, people are still going to want to serve their selfish interests first. That's why I asked you that in what way can you articulate this where it becomes an imperative for the 21st century rather than a...
No, it's not a goody-goody feeling. It's not an utopian thing. You know, one of the main scientists of environment said, you know, in the end, it comes to a question of altruism versus selfishness. If you don't care about future generation, then, you know, that's it. You know, we'll go for it. Probably most of us...
But our problem is that we are led by not just leaders, but even the nature of our society now doesn't care for future generations, doesn't even care for each other. So how can you articulate altruism in a way which really matters then?
But you know, the altruism book came about 10 years ago, and some French journalists say, look at your altruism, you know, Ukraine, Gaza, and everything, ha. But I said, what do you mean? At time of epidemics, cholera or something, are you saying, oh, look at the doctor and the hospital, there's an epidemic. What's the use of doctor and hospital? Well, it's at the time of crisis that you need the most remedy. Shall we be more selfish, more cruel, having absolutely no compassion for others, whether they are different ethnically, nation, or religion, or something? Is that the solution? No, it may be a very hard challenge, but that's still, this is the only concept that can get us out of the trouble. So we have to see it as a very pragmatic solution, not just like a noble ideal, a luxury that we can afford when things go well. It's precisely when things go wrong that we should go to the strongest possible remedy, and that is having more consideration for others and compassion, and we have to realize that, to teach it in school in a secular way, and put it at the heart of the agenda.
So, you know, here's where I wanted to reconnect back to the concepts of Buddhism, because again, in your books and in your talks earlier, and even in our own chat, I found it very compelling when you connected the idea of altruism to the nature of reality itself, you know, because you have a lovely metaphor where you say that we are not like snooker balls that accidentally come in contact with each other, but that we are living in a relational reality, you know, that our very reality is actually interdependent, and that's why altruism becomes like a foundational idea, actually. So would you share with the audience that what is the Buddhist understanding about the nature of reality, and how is interdependence crucial to that idea?
Yes, well, first of all, you know, if you look at evolution, we always speak of struggle for life, you know, the competition and this and that. It's just not quite true. I mean, the most up-to-date idea about evolution, like Martin Nowak in Harvard, he wrote this book called Super Cooperators, is that throughout evolution, of course there's competition, but cooperation has been so much more creative to go from single cells to multiple cells to complex organisms and eventually to social species like ants and bees and us humans. That's through cooperation. And we can struggle for life together, not against each other. So that the history of evolution is mostly in favor. So this is the other law of the jungle, the one of cooperation. And then, what was it?
I was asking about the nature of reality.
Yes, nature of reality. So, why is compassion related to the nature of reality? This is quite interesting and simple. We may imagine ourselves like snooker balls. You know, they are very hard, and they sometimes interact, and that's it. So, but they seems to be very solidly separate. And so, are we like that? If that is the case, then within that our snooker ball of the ego bubble, we could try to build our happiness. It's simpler than taking care of happiness of everyone. We could say, I have nothing about, I'm perfectly happy if others become happy, but it's not my job. I'm looking for my own happiness. But you know, in the bubble of self, of the ego, it smells very stuffy. And so that would be good if it was like that, but it's not like that. We are so fundamentally and deeply interdependent, interconnected. Everything in our life comes through other, with other, happiness, suffering. You know, imagine we are suspended alone in space. What would that mean? You know, no friendship, no love, no nothing. Life is like become like totally empty. So among all the factors, you know, there was a study over 60 years of the main factor contributing to well-being. By far, number one, quality of human relationship, much before income, all this and that. So that means why interdependence, which is the reality, to be attuned with that is the basis for compassion. Because again, as I said, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, may I suffer the whole day. It doesn't take rocket science to project yourself in anyone's mind. And they also basically don't want to suffer. Doesn't mean that we know how to become happy, but even I can be confused, but at least I would prefer not to suffer. So that's a common denominator of common humanity. If we recognize that, that's the basis for compassion.
But there again, Matthieu, I'm going to shift gear a little bit because I'm sure the audience will also want to know a little bit about your personal journey. But I'm going to circle back to this because I'm not still feeling satisfied in the sense that what you're still describing is a kind of social reality, that we are interdependent, you know, someone else's emotions impacts mine, or that we feel happiness or sorrow through others. So one gets that, but that is a social reality which we all understand. I wanted you to talk to us about the fundamental nature of reality as Buddhism understands it, and as you know, who've left the Western world of empiricism and come to this world. So that's but I'm going to come to that. I just want to share with the audience that, you know, I didn't say it in the introduction, but Matthieu comes from the absolute peak of intellectual aristocracy in France. You know, from Henri Cartier-Bresson to Stravinsky. These were the people who were his parents' friends, who he was meeting at 16. And you'll see some of the photographs of Matthieu's work. When he was 16, Henri Cartier-Bresson was telling him that he was really gifted. He came from that world, but really encountered the Tibetan Buddhist masters in Himalayas, in Darjeeling, and he left that Western world and has been here for 55 years, you know. So my first question, Matthieu, would be, what did you find here that you could not find in that extremely animated, elevated intellectual society you were born into?
So now, it's a complex question. I should invite my teacher of Buddhist philosophy. Now, one of the points of Buddhism is to bridge the gap between appearances and reality. Appearances, we seem we are all interdependent. We are sort of more or less permanent. You know, my watch, which I bought in Zurich station 10 years ago for 10 euros, I feel it's still the same. Probably not. I feel it's mine, although it has nothing to do really with me intrinsically. So we solidify, we project a lot of things. We think that things are more or less permanent. Independent, you know, this looks like a very independent from the rest of the world. So, and this is where we perceive things. So, and especially, I think that deep within there is me, you know, autonomous, permanent, unitary, as Descartes would say. Well, basically, if you look for it, it's not like that. We are constant dynamic flow in constant transformation, like the Ganges, which is different from the Hindus. And there's no little head that pops up and says, I'm the Ganges. You know, this is just a flow. Now, if you look at that self, because it's not just intellectual speculation, it has huge implication for happiness and suffering. If you think me, I was that little boy, I was this adult, now I'm this old, 80 years old monk, but it's the same me that defined me. So, is it there? So you say, oh, you pushed me. That's the body. You hurt my feelings. That's the feeling. But my body, my feelings, so this honor is there. Where is that, you know? So it's not in the body. Where? If I lose my legs, I still have an ego, but I'm without legs, but my ego is not cut by half. So then it's in the mind. Okay, mind. Past thoughts are gone. We can remember, but they are basically gone. Future thoughts we can imagine, but they are not there. Present moment, ungraspable. So where is that self? in between something that doesn't exist anymore, that not exists yet, and we cannot catch, we cannot find a location, a color, a shape. So basically, it's a convenient illusion because I need to call you Shoma, you call me Matthieu, but M-A-T-T-T, I break out the letters, there's nothing left. So it's all a convenient concept that we attach, just as we name the Ganges to distinguish from the Brahmaputra, but there's no Ganges entity. No. You say, okay, that's a philosophical question. But what is the consequences of taking there as a core? Then I have to protect it. I have to please it. Attraction, repulsion. From attraction, repulsion, what comes? Animosity, craving, pride, jealousy. What are those? Mental poison. Poison your life, but others' life. And then that's suffering. So an initial misconception leads to suffering. But you know, it's purely an intellectual fabrication. I'll give you an example. You are sleeping in a boat in the middle of a lake, taking a nap happily, and suddenly, bam, another boat rams in yours. You say, how dare? And then you see the boat was empty. And you laugh, ha, 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 ha. Why? Because the me was not the target. So there's all kinds of experiments you can do like that. There was a very interesting done in psychology department. The mind, the I, and the me, mind. So they gave a kind of a cup to all the students at the beginning. Then they speak about other things. So they say this cost about $5. At the end of 45 minutes of doing other things, they say, okay, now we buy it back from you. Oh, no, I like it. So they would not give it back for less than $8, $10. So that's the mind added tax. Right. So it's purely a concept. So those things are not just ideas. They have consequences in terms of happiness and suffering.
So, since you brought this up, I'll question you about this, but I do want to come back to just the personal illumination, or what was the emotional energy you felt in the Himalayas which made you give up your very privileged life in France. You didn't quite answer that. But because you brought up this idea of the self, so Matthieu, through your 55 years of practice, or all the monks, all the ascetics who practice meditation and dissolve this idea of the ego self, then in what lies your uniqueness? Like, what is your purpose then? Is there any difference between you and the Dalai Lama? Is there any difference between you and...
A difference?
Yes. What is it? Like, if you're going to dissolve your qualities and your emotions and your anger and your memory, then who are you and what's your purpose?
So there's a difference like the sky and the earth, but...
No, that's just
but
reverence.
The thing is, it's not unbreachable. One of our main practice, and that's what I did when I first met my teacher, Kangyu Rinpoche, in Darjeeling in June 1967. I didn't know anything. And I just sat there for a few weeks at his feet in a little hut in Darjeeling. I didn't know what to do. Meditation, I was thinking of saying like that and looking in the sky. So I thought, this is such incredibly good human being, It's like a mountain of kindness and wisdom and being completely available. He has nothing to lose, nothing to gain, to have more students, everything to share, everything to give. So what can I do? Maybe I can try to blend in meditation my little narrow-minded, deluded mind with this vast wisdom mind like the sky. So I thought, that sounds good. So I tried to mingle my little mind with his mind. And later on, I found that there's one of the central practice of Buddhism called Guru Yoga. Yoga in Sanskrit means to unite with. So it is to unite with the nature of the teacher, which is nothing else but the Buddha nature that we all have inside. So it helps to rediscover our own Buddha nature. So that's the whole path. I'm very far from the result, but I'm so happy to be on the way. Even I'm very far, every step is meaningful.
So, just to go a little bit more into this, so what is this? There's this idea of a relational universe, that we literally, the reality is what you are making of it. It's your emanations, your perspectives, the reality exists in relation to what you're projecting into it. But even Butsu, there's no fixed self, you explain that, and much of our suffering and sorrow comes from the idea of a permanent, immutable self, ego self.
Sure.
But even Buddhism believes in consciousness, you know. So then we come to the big discussion that I suppose absorbs the 21st century, because we have AI, there's talk of machine consciousness, that in your understanding then, what is consciousness? And what is then individual consciousness?
So it's not my understanding, of course, it's the...
I meant your interpretation of Buddhism.
So according to Buddhism, the cause and the effect have to have a similarity of nature. Now, you put a grain of wheat in the soil, it doesn't lead rice. There's a community of nature, so it will be wheat. So everything is momentary. Nothing remains the same 2 consecutive instants. Otherwise, they will be stuck into one state and never change. If the principle of change will stop, then it will stop for good, because there's no more cause for change. So every single moment of consciousness leads to the next one and disappear in the process. So moment by moment. It's everything for that. Also the gross reality change moment by moment. So there's the minute impermanence. Now, the preceding moment of consciousness has to be of the same nature, conscious. There cannot be a moment totally devoid of consciousness, and the next one suddenly is conscious. That's contrary to the basically law of nature, which means that consciousness cannot come from nothing. It is always a preceding moment, and that cannot go in nothingness. In one of the classic Buddhist texts, the Bodhisattva, it says 1,000,000 causes cannot bring to existence something that does not exist. The idea of nothingness is a concept. No, the world is there, the phenomenal world unfolds. We can imagine, there could be nothing, but just it's an imagination. So something that the concept of there be nothing cannot be a cause.
We may lose the audience.
No, but to say,
Matthieu,
so that means the consciousness is beginningless and endless, and we are at some point with the association of this, that's what Buddhists say, association of this gross body with a consciousness for a while, then they function together, then whatever happens in your mind is seen in the brain, but that's the gross aspect, and the most fundamental luminous aspect, which is not determined by thoughts and contents, that is beginningless and endless. That's the Buddhist view.
So, I'm going to again talk to the audience about the fact that the ideas of death, and, you personally have had past life memories, and what does that even mean for the idea of consciousness? But I just want to pursue this a moment longer, Matthieu, that how then do you deploy consciousness without an idea of the self in a real world, in a material world, where if you have not become a monk and you've not moved back from the hurly-burly of life, then how are you meant to deploy consciousness but not an idea of the self in a practical world?
So when we wake up, we have the idea, I exist. I'm hungry, I'm sad, I'm cold, so the I. That's okay. Then there is the person. The person is my whole history since I'm young. It is the river. That's fine. There's moment after moment, there's a history. The history of Brahmaputra, who starts from Mount Kailash and goes throughout Tibet and comes in Assam, is not the same as the Ganges. So that's fine. Now, then comes the self, or the ego. Then on top of that, we say, there must be something that is the core of it, and that's define it, and that travels along. That's where, according to Buddhism, we make this intellectual mistake, which has consequences. But everything else, the notion of the flow of the person, the I, instant I, that's fine. There's no problem with that. That's not going to lead to suffering. It's the misconception of believing there's a solid self that leads to attraction, repulsion, and eventually to suffering. So if we recognize that, then, it's like you have been this imposture that has been using your credit card for lives and lives and life, and you just say, okay, now that's enough.
Right. So, Matthieu, you've written in your book about the fact that you have past life memories, and that you've had flashes. What does that mean then in this idea of reincarnation, and what's the concept of death in Buddhism? In many ways that idea of impermanence is really the source of suffering. So what is the idea of impermanence and the idea of reincarnation?
So impermanence is not the source of suffering. If you suffer, the impermanence makes that you may cure the next day.
Right.
Impermanence is the nature of things, whether you like it or not. It doesn't matter. If I drop this glass, gravity will go down. If I believe in gravity or not, it doesn't matter. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. So now, according to Buddhism, we are like a stream. So now, our action modify the quality of that stream. So you take the Ganges, if at Gangotri you put some cyanide, then everyone down the stream will be poisoned. Now, if you put some medicinal plant, it may help the health of all those. So the law of cause and effect is that you can modify what is in that stream. Is it full of hatred, of craving, of selfishness, of cruelty? Then the result down the stream will be suffering. If you filter that, purify that, and you fill it with compassion, with loving kindness, with care for others, then the stream will be a medicinal water.
So let me personalize this a little bit more, because we began with the idea of training the mind as a muscle. So let's assume even in your world, there was, or say, in fact, the Dalai Lama does face it, that there is extreme resistance, there's political resistance, there's, big forces at play. What is the difference in the way you have trained your mind to respond to those who are angry with you or who thwart you or, who try to do harm to you?
Respond to what, sorry?
How do you respond to those who are trying to harm you or who might try to thwart you or who,
yes.
As indeed the Dalai Lama faces from a very large nation like China?
So I think we should not be just like a, no, yes, beat me, it's okay, it's fine, no problem, I love you. Right. It's not a weakness. You can be very firm, but no hatred. You see, you could be firm when it's needed, because there's no need to encourage someone who does wrong. Is also creating bad karma. You are not helping. But never wish harm. Imagine a doctor who is treating a very violent, mad person. So maybe he might have to tie it on the chair so he doesn't harm himself, harm the doctor, harm everyone. Next step, he's not going to take a stick and bash his brain. He's going to say, can I cure this person? You see? So compassion is to address any cause of suffering, wherever it is, wherever it takes. Some people say, oh, this is stupid. What do you do with bloody dictators? Of course, you are not wishing them success. You say, maybe I will give him a plane ticket for the Bahamas, and he will feel good, and he will stop killing people. No, the compassion then is to think, may the cruelty, may the indifference, may the greed, may the complete lack of compassion, somehow, I wish it could be, you can wish that at least. Maybe that person leave that person's mind. May the culture, the schooling, the system that brought someone like that in power, may that change to different causes and circumstances. You can wish that. So that's compassion. It's not being stupid. It's just wishing that to remedy to any cause of suffering. It's different from moral judgment. You may totally condemn a dictator, but he's a source of suffering. He's going probably to suffer himself. So compassion is may all the present, future cause of that is creating, may somehow we find some antidote for that. That's compassion. And that could be gone with courage, with determination, with doing things, but without hatred.
So, in fact, you can ask him that when we take a break, that somebody once asked Matthieu who would he most want to spend time with. And at the time of that interview, he said he would love to spend time with Saddam Hussein, so Matthieu.
So I did something once, can I have time to say that?
Yes, of course.
I did so many things with the scientists, but one time this was very interesting. It was in Berkeley, and they wanted to see how a meditator reacts to confrontation. So they wanted to get the most obnoxious professor in the campus of Berkeley. Of course, they didn't tell him he was known to be like that. So he didn't come. He wanted to bring all the equipment in his office. It didn't work. So they got the second most obnoxious guy. But first of all, they paired me with Phil Glaser, who was a Nobel Prize of Physics, a very nice gentleman, and then he studied the brain. And we had a conversation on the controversial topic, why someone with a scientific career would get the stupid idea to become a Buddhist monk and believe in something as crazy as reincarnation. So then we were all, both of us, with all those sensors and electrodes and measuring our blood pressure, and they were filming our facial expression. So we started, and we had a lovely conversation for 15 minutes, and we both wanted to continue. Our physiology was calm, so it was a beautiful conversation. Then came the second one. And I told him, we're supposed to have a confrontation. He said, don't worry, that's going to be. So he went straight on. So then I tried to answer, like I'm answering you, sort of try to explain things. And
am I third most obnoxious?
So in the beginning, he was completely, his physiology was so aroused, he was full of, stress and everything. And then as we talked, he was going, blah, 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 blah. And at the end, he said, I can't fight with this guy. He says reasonable thing, and there's something about this guy, I just can't fight with him. So that's the best way to disarm someone like that is just to be yourself, to be kind, to answer the best you can, and then, if you start, yourself escalating the conflict, then never works. So there's a Buddhist saying that you cannot clap with one hand.
Right.
A conflict is clapping with two hands, that with two people. If one is decided not to get into a conflict, you cannot bring into conflictual attitude.
So just last couple of questions, Matthieu. And Matthieu has a foundation, all the money from the proceeds of his books, which have sold millions of copies in many, many languages, go into the work that he does with Karuna Shechen. And there are pamphlets outside, there's the website. Matthieu is looking for funding to increase the work that they're doing, both in the Himalayas, in Nepal, in Jharkhand, Bihar. They provide health, education, build bridges. So there's a lot of work that Matthieu is doing in the real world, apart from teaching us to train our minds towards compassion. So do reach out during the break to any of the Lucid Lines team. There's also Shweta here, and of course Matthieu himself. It would be wonderful if all of you contribute to it. But coming back to this, Matthieu, one is that you've been declared the happiest man, which means that you've been training your mind. What has that done to also, because not everyone here is a monk, not everyone has opted to live outside, as I said, the demands of material life. Has that also made you a more proficient human being, a more alert human being? All these years of meditation, has it sharpened your faculties in other ways?
Well, we don't have to be a monk and all that to do this, Again, I've been interpreting for His Holiness Dalai Lama for 30 years in French. And often, he gives a speech on different topics, mostly at the end, he says, whatever I've said, just if you want to practice, otherwise just leave it, he says. But one thing, don't forget, have good heart. So that's the whole thing. If you have good heart, everything else is solved. Conflict, whatever you want, finding the right solution for social injustice, good heart, having an economy that's serving of society and not the opposite, with 10 people own as much as the poorest quarter of humanity, completely, crazy system. That's the opposite of good heart. Good heart. What you could do extraordinary things, with all these hundreds of billions that those guys have accumulated, I have a dream like Martin Luther King, like Trump getting on his knee, begging for forgiveness to all those migrants, inviting them, all the kids on this golf course, building beautiful schools for them, and, serving them with love, and welcoming them, and spreading all those useless billions to make everyone go to school, everyone can go to the dentist. And that would be so wonderful.
Right. So, Matthieu, that brings us back to that one unanswered question. Give us some ideas of what your past life visions, yeah, what your visions have been, and what is the Buddhist idea of reincarnation?
Past life, real past life?
Yes.
Okay. One time in Taiwan, someone told me, you must have been something in your past life. I said, yes. I was a cow in the meadow in front of Shechen Monastery in Tibet. I was listening to the teaching, and that's why I'm reborn as a student of those great teachers.
Matthieu, you're copping out. You have had...
I have no clue. I have hardly any clue where I left my keys and all that, so how can I know about past life?
Okay. I can see when I'm being deflected by a master, so I'm not going to ask you that question. But there is, it's fascinating, and that is why Matthieu does continue to collaborate with scientists, with neuroscientists, philosophers, because everyone is trying to solve the idea of what is consciousness. Of course, the Buddhist tradition for 2,500 years has an idea and a conception of consciousness which clearly works because, as you said, it at least transforms the brain into the kind of powerhouse that Matthieu represents. And like he said, not everybody's brains have been mapped, so maybe there's a whole proliferation of wonderful brains like yours.
Okay, no. So I want to add one word about Karuna.
Yes.
Now, we are in India. So why should French people help Indian people? So it's time that Indian people help Indian people. So, we really want to continue for many years to come in Bihar. So much to do. We really deal with the poorest of the poorest, educated women, women literacy. We made 60,000 kitchen garden for food security, all these things. So I think really, please come join us anytime. And we continue this work for many years. I'm 80, I'm not going to last very long. But I hope that this work, which is a work from the heart, can continue to help. There's much to do in your country. You know that very better than me, even though I lived there for almost more than 50 years. So that's my wish, that we may come to a time where Karuna Shechen in India is sort of self-sufficient, Indian helping Indians. That will be the best, isn't it?
So I want to end with one last thing, which Matthieu said. He said, I'm not good at fundraising, but I'm good at friend-raising. So I hope this is a whole room full of friends that you have acquired today. Thank you very, very much, Matthieu. Thank you so much.